The year is 1598. In Russia, the last Tsar of the Rurik dynasty, Fyodor I, dies. The time of troubles, in Russian Smutnoye Vremya, begins. Boris Godunov ascends the Russian throne. Rumor among the Russian villages and towns is spread that Dmitry, the younger son of Ivan the Terrible and the rightful heir to the throne, survived and tries to regain the crown. The first, allegedly miraculously survived, false Dmitry, was most likely the runaway monk, but that information is uncertain. In 1604 he came to Kraków, but didn't gain the support of the Polish king Sigismund III Vasa. However, some Polish magnates, wanting to expand their influence, supported him. The Pope, who wanted to subjugate the Orthodox Church, was also on his side. Supported by about 2,500 Polish soldiers and 2,000 Don Cossacks, Dmitry set off to the east. Initially, his campaign didn't go his way, but the situation improved when a popular uprising broke out in Ukraine, and the Cossacks took the fortress in Kromy. In April 1605, Boris Godunov died, and his son, Fyodor II, ascended the throne. However, he wasn't allowed to enjoy his rule for a long time. As Dmitry's troops approached Moscow, riots broke out in which he and his mother died. On June 20, 1605, Dmitry rode triumphantly into Moscow and was crowned the Tsar of Russia. He declared peaceful rule, abolished the death penalty, and granted amnesty to his opponents. However, he surrounded himself with many Polish advisors, which Russian boyars didn't like. In May 1606, they started a revolt, led by Vasily Shuyski. On May 27th, they murdered Dmitry together with about 500 Poles, mainly the nobles. His corpse was massacred, quartered and burned, and the ashes were loaded into a cannon placed on the outskirts of Moscow and fired to the west, towards the lands of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, a symbolic gesture nevertheless. The leader of the boyar uprising, Vasily Shuyski, ascended the Russian throne. However, the riots in Russia didn't stop. The peasant uprising of Bolotnikov broke out. Another pretender to the throne took advantage of the turmoil, false Dmitry II. In 1607, he gathered a sizable army and started another campaign, so-called Second Dmitriade. This time, however, despite several attempts, Dmitry didn't manage to capture Moscow itself. Tsar Vasily Shuyski, due to the fear of losing his power, signed an alliance with Sweden. This, however, triggered another Polish-Russian war. When the Polish king Sigismund III Vasa besieged Smolensk in 1609, many Polish soldiers left Dmitry's army and joined their fellow countrymen. In 1610, one of the most famous Polish victories took place, the Battle of Kushino. The Polish army, commanded by Stanisław Żółkiewski, despite being 5 times less numerous, destroyed the combined Russian-Swedish army, thanks to the powerful charges of the winged hussars. Russian boyars decided to expel Tsar Vasily Shuyski from the throne and opened the gates of Moscow for the victorious Żółkiewski. Back in the reign of Boris Godunov, Polish magnates led by Lew Sapieha presented a vision of a union between the Commonwealth and Moscow to the Tsar. The Polish-Lithuanian Muscovite Commonwealth was to concentrate on the joint fight against the Tatars and the Turks. The conquered lands, the economy, and the Baltic and Black Sea fleets were to be common. Godunov, however, rejected this proposal. He was afraid of the domination of the Commonwealth, which was much stronger than Russia at that time. A few years later, however, this vision seemed to be at Commonwealth fingertips. On August 27, 1610, Stanisław Żółkiewski concluded an agreement with the boyars on the appointment of the Polish prince, Władysław Vasa, as a new Tsar of Russia. The Poles were also to help the Russians drive out the troops of false Dmitry II. When those news reached him, he fled to Kaluga and his campaign collapsed. A few weeks later, the Polish crew occupied the Kremlin, the fortified heart of Moscow. Russian mints began making a new coin with the image of the Polish prince, the new Tsar of Russia. The whole situation, however, didn't please the Polish king, Sigismund III Vasa. He didn't believe in the permanence of the agreements with Russian boyars and feared for the life of his son, who, having come to Moscow, could end up like his predecessors, false Dimitris, pushed away from the Moscow walls alive or as a cannon powder. The Polish and Lithuanian soldiers stationed in Moscow were initially treated in a friendly manner by the local population. They were even hosted in the homes of wealthy merchants and nobility. After some time, however, religious conflicts began to break out in the city. Outside the walls of Moscow, the Polish and Lithuanian cavalry started to plunder villages, and in many regions of Russia, armed militia started to gather.
You yourself know the truth about what happened here and in other towns. Lithuanian people took possession of holy churches and icons, offending God. Hasn't everything already been destroyed and desecrated everywhere? Have mercy on us poor, brought to the brink of death. Stand your souls and heads together with us against the enemies of the cross of Christ.
Appeal of Muscovites to provincial towns, Moscow, January 1611. In March 1611, an uprising of the local population broke out in Moscow against the Polish occupants. The rebels counted on the support of the First People's Militia from Ryazan, commanded by Prokop Lyapunov. The Poles suppressed the revolt, but as a result of the fighting, a huge fire broke out and consumed almost the entire city and deprived Poles of most of the supplies. In May and June 1611, the Russian People's Militia from Ryazan captured Zemlianoy and Bely Gorod, the outer districts of Moscow. Poles and Lithuanians were forced to take refuge in Kitai Gorod and inside the walls of Kremlin. More than a half of the militia consisted of Cossacks, who, after taking part of the city, began to rape and plunder the local population. A conflict broke out between Lyapunov and the Cossack leader. Seeing this, the Poles spread rumors in the enemy camps that Lyapunov was to cooperate with them. The leader of the First People's Militia was killed by his own soldiers soon after. At that time, the Second People's Militia began to form in Nizhny Novgorod. It was led by the merchant Kuzma Minin and Prince Dmitry Pożarski. Outside Moscow, the situation seemed to be taking a more favorable turn for the Poles. In June 1611, after 2 years of siege, the Poles occupied Smolensk, known as the Gate to Moscow. In October, at the royal castle in Warsaw, the former Tsar of Russia, Vasily Shujski, together with his brothers, paid a tribute to the Polish king. When winter came, the Polish-Lithuanian garrison of Kremlin began to suffer from even greater hunger. The soldiers were forced to eat dogs, cats and rats. There were also single cases of cannibalism. In December 1611, the Lithuanian hetman Jan Karol Chodkiewicz broke through to the besieged Poles together with small reinforcements and the desired supplies. Some Poles, however, couldn't withstand such conditions and deserted, leaving Moscow. At the beginning of 1612, next Polish troops broke through several times with supplies for the besieged garrison. In August, however, the Second People's Militia, commanded by Dmitry Pożarski and numbering about 14,000 soldiers, arrived at Moscow. From the First People's Militia, only about 3,000 Cossacks remained, constituting only 1/4 of the initial size of the movement. On September 1st, 1612, Hetman Jan Karol Chodkiewicz, together with cavalry, the Polish, Hungarian and German infantry, and the Cossacks of Seweryn Nalewajka, also appeared near Moscow. The relief force numbered around 7,000 soldiers. Its goal was, like many times before, to break through to the Kremlin and deliver supplies to the besieged soldiers. On the outskirts of Moscow, the Polish cavalry charged and shattered the troops of Dmitry Pożarski, who had to retreat behind the city ramparts. The provincial governor and the commander of the Muscovite army, Prince Dmitry Mikhailovich Pożarski, with all his regiments, entered the battle, and the fight was deadly. It was a great slaughter, strong pressure from both sides, cruelly targeting one another, positioning their lances and striking to death. Arrows are whistling in the air, the lances are crumbling. A lot of corpses fell onto the ground. Chronograph Sergei Kubasov. The Commonwealth's infantry set off to storm the walls. The blow was strong enough to push the Russians to their camp. Seeing this, the decimated Kremlin defenders tried to distract the Russians by charging them from behind, but after initial success, greatly outnumbered, they had to withdraw. The Russian militia was saved by a flank attack led by troops crossing the river. Poles had to withdraw. On September the 3rd, Chodkiewicz attacked the Zamoskvorieckie district. Once again, the Russian defense was broken, and the Hungarian infantry seized the charge of Saint Grigory. Godless Lutherans, Polish and Lithuanian people suddenly, with a furious blow, attacked the Muscovite soldiers. The cavalry regiments turned their backs and started to flee. So did the infantry. They all abandoned their ditches. The convictions of Avram Palitzin. It's important to note that probably the only Lutherans in the Commonwealth's army were 200 German soldiers, only 3% of the entire force, and even this isn't certain. Not mentioning that 2 years earlier, Russia was the country that allied with Lutheran Sweden. After some time, masses of Cossacks and Russians, inspired by the religious speech, fell onto the Poles from all directions. The Polish army withdrew from Moscow to Smolensk. 1,500 people and all 400 foot carts were lost. The losses on the Russian side were similar. The King of Poland, Sigismund III Vasa, was preparing a relief force, but the army was assembling very slowly. The last Poles and Lithuanians in the Kremlin, led by Mikołaj Struś, have already run out of the supplies. The scale of cannibalism has reached its peak. The dead were dug out, and the gangs were prowling the streets, catching the weakest people. Diseases and desertion spread. Unheard of and difficult to describe. That's not present in any chronicles and stories. Because when grass, roots, mice, dogs, cats and carrion were gone, the prisoners died, the corpses were dug out of the ground. The infantrymen ate one another, and people caught on the streets were also eaten. Truszkowski Wojciech, an infantry lieutenant, ate his 2 sons. The one Hajduk also ate his son, the other one his mother. One soldier ate his servant. The son ate his father, the father ate his son. The master ate his servant and the servant ate his master. No one was safe. Whoever could ate the other one. The healthier one got rid of the sick. Ensign Józef Budziło. On November the 1st, the Cossacks seized Kitaygorod. On November the 6th, the conditions of surrender were established. The Poles released the boyar families, and they were to save their lives. The gates were opened on November the 7th. Half of the Polish garrison was taken captive by the troops of Dmitry Pożarski. The second part fell into the hands of the Cossacks, who murdered most of the prisoners, explaining it by a disgust for the cannibals. In March 1613, Mikhail Romanov was elected onto the Russian throne and started a new, but also the last dynasty of Russian Tsars. The King of Poland, Sigismund III Vasa, didn't care much about losing Moscow. More important for him was capturing the strategically located Smolensk, which remained in Commonwealth hands after the signing of the truce with Russia in 1618. The war was ultimately won by Poles and Lithuanians, but nevertheless, Russia preserved its independence. Recently, November the 4th started to be celebrated in Russia as National Unity Day, the day of the surrender of the Polish garrison of Kremlin, November the 7th, and the Orthodox celebration of the Our Lady of Kazan, November the 4th, were combined. Additionally, this day symbolizes the end of the time of troubles in Russia. The capture of Moscow and keeping the Kremlin for 19 months is considered by many historians one of the greatest victories of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. For the second time, Poles entered Moscow as winners exactly 200 years later, in 1812, with Napoleon. Coincidence? Yeah, probably. The stay, however, again didn't end well for them. And that's all I wanted to tell you in today's episode, dedicated to the Polish-Lithuanian occupation of Russia, which lasted almost 2 years. I'm aware that it's a controversial topic, but I think those are the most important ones to cover, using as many sources as you can. Don't you think so? Anyway, if you liked this video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, rate the video and share it with your friends. See ya!